Welcome back to Blumira Briefings, your weekly download of the top headlines and trends for your security practice. This week, a critical cPanel flaw letting attackers say, "I'm the web host now." A phishing campaign that affected 35,000 people by slipping right past their own MFA, and a learning platform breach with a Tuesday ransom deadline. So let's get into it. First up, cPanel and Web Host Manager are dealing with a critical authentication bypass flaw that is CVE 2026-41940 with a CVSS of 9.8, sitting directly in the login flow. A unauthenticated attacker over the network can hit the right path and walk away with full admin access. That means no password, no session token, no MFA prompt required, nada. It's already being actively exploited, and the early targets skew towards government tenants and managed service providers, which kind of makes it a pressing amount of sense. cPanel is the universal remote for a huge slice of the hosting world. With one bypass of one server, you can affect hundreds of downstream sites or databases, mail, DNS, take persistence, you have your pick. For an MSP, that could turn a client list into a target list overnight. Fortunately, the patch landed in late April, so, do the thing. Jake, for an MSP that's running cPanel across a fleet of customer servers, what does post-patch sweep look like, and what are you checking to make sure that nobody slipped in during the exploitation window?
So this cPanel exploit that we're seeing, this is one of those worst case scenarios because it's all about the web management for the cPanel access, and we're always talking about locking down those publicly accessible web management portals. And this is one of those ones where we're seeing a full authentication bypass to get around that portal. So basically, remote attackers are getting around the login and just able to access the underlying infrastructure without having to provide any creds with this exploit. The big highlights about this exploit is that if you can compromise that cPanel web admin access, you're not just getting a single website to compromise. You could potentially compromise any sites that are under that cPanel management portal, and it could be tons. It just all depends on your configuration and who you're hosting, but it could be potentially a pretty big impact. Additionally, this exploit grants root admin access to the entire server, so you're landing right on the server, and it helps attackers to move into the network laterally further, so they can do more damage than just on the sites. They can get inside the network, do some ransomware, all that kind of stuff. So it is pretty bad in that case. Every customer hosting account is exposed, so attackers could get access to files, databases, email, DNS, pretty much anything on that server. And like I said, for those managing multiple customers, one exploit could equal dozens of client environments compromised. So there's going to be three main things I want to talk about here to make sure you're prepared and you can respond to this appropriately. First one is patch immediately. cPanel has released a fix, so go forth and patch. We know that not everybody can patch immediately, so if you can't patch yet, cPanel does provide some workaround guidance. A couple of things they said is you can block inbound traffic to all cPanel and WHM management ports at the firewall, disable service subdomains, and disable and stop the cPanel and WebDAV services. This effectively shuts down the public cPanel access entirely, which we're actually starting to see across some of the hosting providers just because it's higher risk for them. So they're shutting down public access so that they can get the patches installed and then put things back up. Point number two is patching doesn't mean you're clean. I've seen some quotes in here, people saying that this thing has been seen in the wild for like 30 plus days. So once you do go patching and get all your patches, or even if you do the workaround, do some checks, see if you can find any suspicious activity, look for new user accounts, anything that's like adjusting the settings on the cPanel server to allow remote access. We're seeing attackers deploy C2 malware and connections, so looking for weird DNS resolution or network connections on their cPanel servers would be something to look out for. And just trying to see if you can find anybody trying to pivot deeper into the network. This was added to the CISA Kev list, so it is a known use in ransomware campaigns, and they did give it a 3-day remediation deadline for government companies, so it kind of gives you a little bit of an idea. Even if you're not a government company, gives you a little bit of an idea of the the risk at at play here and the severity of this. So after you patch, you're going to want to audit for new cPanel accounts. You want to check session files for tampering and review access logs for unusual API calls. cPanel is actually providing a detection script publicly available on their support page to help you look for indicators of compromise and check for those weird looking sessions or sessions in the file system. There's also public proof of concept code available. So if you want to run the exploit yourself against your own environment and just see what that looks like. Obviously, that comes with the caveat of get approval for it and just make sure you know what you're doing. But it can be helpful to understand what the logs look like, if there's anything you can get from there, or even just test to see if you're vulnerable, or put in a patch or a workaround of your own and see if you can get that exploit running. Tip number 3 is third-party managed cPanel. Not all of us are managing our own cPanels, so don't assume that your hosting provider has it handled. Make sure you reach out to them directly and confirm that they've patched and checked for prior compromise. So those are just some of the things to keep in mind when you're responding to this cPanel compromise. And best of luck to everybody. This one's bad.
And next, MFA had a rough week, which, as usual, means that a lot of people had a rough week. Microsoft is tracking a global phishing campaign that bypassed multi-factor authentication on more than 35,000 Microsoft 365 and Entra ID accounts across 13,000 organizations and 26 countries. But about 92% of it landed in the United States. The technique is another adversary in the middle attack. The lures lean on a code of conduct or a disciplinary action theme, PDF attachments that get that heart rate pumping and spike just enough panic that people click without thinking. From there, the attacker stands up a reverse proxy site that mirrors the real Microsoft login, and then as the attacker signs in, the proxy relays their credentials and their MFA response straight through to Microsoft while also capturing the session cookie that comes back. From that point on, the attacker is already inside an authenticated session, which means, again, no password to guess, no MFA challenge to clear, and business email compromise typically follows within a day. So, Matt, what's the immediate move for a team that suspects that session cookies may already be in the wild beyond the obvious credential reset?
Microsoft is warning about a large-scale phishing campaign that successfully compromised more than 35,000 users across 26 countries in mid-April. Healthcare and finance organizations in the United States were among the most heavily targeted. What makes this campaign stand out is that attackers weren't just stealing usernames and passwords, they were stealing authentication session tokens. The attackers used what's called an adversary-in-the-middle phishing technique. Essentially, victims were sent to convincing fake login pages that acted as a reverse proxy between the user and the real Microsoft login portal. The user logs in, MFA is completed successfully, and everything looks normal. But behind the scenes, the attacker captures the authenticated session token, the same token that tells Microsoft that this user has already passed MFA. That means that the attacker can access the account without needing the password again and without triggering another MFA prompt. Microsoft says these attacks targeted the Microsoft 365 and Entra ID environments, leading to business email compromise, financial fraud, and long-term unauthorized access. For MSPs, this is especially important because attackers increasingly use compromised client identities as pathways into provider environments, or they'll use compromised provider accounts to pivot down to multiple downstream clients. All of this highlights a very difficult reality. Multi-factor authentication, while critical, is no longer enough. Organizations should be looking at layered protections, including phishing-resistant MFA methods like FIDO2 security keys, conditional access policies, sign-in risk monitoring, session revocation procedures, and most importantly, in my opinion, having stronger visibility into things like impossible travel, suspicious logins, and token abuse activities. One of the most important defenses is, and in my opinion, will always be regular security awareness training. Users need to understand that modern phishing attacks no longer look like the badly written emails from just a couple of years ago. Many of these fake pages are convincing enough that even experienced users can get caught if they're moving too quickly during the workday. Training employees to slow down, verify login prompts, avoid unsolicited authentication requests, and report suspicious activity early can significantly reduce the success rate of attacks like these. Attackers are adapting. They're targeting the authentication process itself now, not just the passwords, and unfortunately, that means that organizations need to adapt just as quickly.
Finally, and all ages phishing campaign targeting a top e-learning provider. Instructure, the company behind the Canvas learning management system, disclosed a cybersecurity incident on May 1st and said it was contained the next day. Then on May 7th, Extortion Group of the Year winners, Shiny Hunters, seen recently in headlines near you, claimed a second breach and posted data that they say covers up to 9,000 schools and roughly 275 million users worldwide. Instructure has been clear that they haven't found evidence that passwords, date of birth, government IDs, or financial data were taken. What does appear to have been exposed are names, email addresses, student ID numbers, and direct messages between users, which is still not nothing, especially when that user base includes minors. The extortion deadline that Shiny Hunters set is this coming Tuesday, May 12th. So, Mike, when an entire industry starts to consolidate into a single SaaS provider like this, what are the realistic levers that a school IT team or an MSP that's supporting one actually has to move before an incident like this and once the clock is running?
Well, it looks like Shiny Hunters is at it again. They got into an ed tech provider called Instructure. It's an interesting name, hard to say. So people are probably more familiar with the product they make called Canvas, which is used everywhere, in EDU, in K-12. Lots of companies use it as a LMS for learning management. Your kid's school probably uses it, right? So they announced a breach. Shiny Hunters is doing their typical tactic of, hack and leak extortion. They got a lot of data out. It's reported about 3.6 terabytes of data. Instructure saying that it's not financial or PII, but or passwords, I think is what financial or passwords. But it's definitely a lot of data. Reports are pointing around to some issues with their API and being able to get in through that method and abuse it. Shiny Hunters is really, they're doing their Shiny Hunters thing. They are brutal. They will pinpoint. They have playbooks. They know what they're doing. In the U.S., this is all coming around the time of finals. In K-12 schools and some EDUs, so they know exactly what they're doing when to put the the pressure on. Schools are in a very rough spot. People are responding from everything from cutting access to their Canvas systems to rolling EDR, basically, or rolling IR, and trying to attest to whether their systems were touched or not. Shiny Hunter basically has started doing, login page takeovers for extortion letters. People are reporting seeing these across multiple orgs. It's about 9,000 institutions, it looks like. So this one's tough. They know what they're doing. The timing is, intentional. We're just Shiny Hunters is one of those things that's, they're very opportunistic. Their targets are hand-picked, and they have a tough playbook to defend against, because typically they're coming in through a third party, and something in the ed tech space. These platforms are deployed for years, if not decades, and the really aren't a ton of options for people to switch to. So, and if there is, the budget and project to do that is typically tough. So, the only advice I can give is understand what these systems are connected to, limit the blast radius, right? Make it so that you do have a playbook if you do need to take it offline, right? What does that look like in your org or yeah. So good luck out there.
So to review for this week, we had a hosting panel flaw that made the front door keyless entry, a phishing kit that lets MFA do its job and then steals the script, and learning platform breaches with a costly homework assignment coming due on Tuesday. I don't think that we'll get away with saying the dog ate this one. As always, we'd love to hear your thoughts and questions in the comments. We'll be back next week with more updates and some very exciting news from Blumira. Stay tuned. Until then, Stay safe out there.